The slap came so fast, I didn't even have time to blink. One moment I was standing beside the gift table at the Royal Oaks Ballroom, my champagne glass trembling slightly in my hand as I watched my son Mark dance with his new bride. The next moment, my daughter-in-law's palm connected with my cheek with a crack that echoed off the marble floors like a gunshot. My glasses flew off my face. I watched them tumble through the air in what felt like slow motion, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers before shattering on the elegant ballroom floor. 130 guests froze mid-conversation. The string quartet stopped playing. Even the waiters stood motionless with their champagne trays suspended in mid-air. Complete, absolute silence. My cheek burned like fire, but the pain in my chest was so much worse. I touched my face instinctively, feeling the heat radiating from where her hand had struck me. My vision blurred without my glasses, but I could still make out Lisa's silhouette standing over me, her white wedding gown pristine and perfect, her face twisted with rage. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she screamed, her voice shrill enough to make several guests wince. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space." The silence that followed was deafening. I slowly crouched down, my knees protesting, my hands shaking as I felt around for my broken glasses. The floor was cold beneath my fingertips. Sharp fragments of lens cut into my palm, but I barely felt it. Some guests looked away, suddenly fascinated by their shoes or the elaborate floral centerpieces. Others whispered to each other behind cupped hands, their eyes darting between Lisa and me like spectators at a tennis match. But no one, absolutely no one, moved to help me. My son Mark stood 10 feet away, his gaze fixed on the floor as if I had become invisible, as if his mother wasn't on her hands and knees, bleeding, humiliated in front of everyone we knew. "You're not welcome here anymore," Lisa continued, smoothing down her wedding dress with practiced precision. "Mark and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better." Her words were pure venom, but what killed me was the silence from my son. Not a word of protest, not a single syllable of defense. I rose slowly, feeling every one of my 68 years in my bones. Tears streamed down my face, but inside something had shifted. Something fundamental had broken and could never be repaired. That slap wasn't just a physical blow. It was the final straw. For years I had lived quietly, keeping my head down, accepting their condescending comments about my worn-out clothes, my old car, my simple life. But this had crossed a line that should never have been touched. What none of those people staring at me with pity knew was that I had secrets. Secrets that would change everything. Secrets that not even my own son knew. I walked toward the exit with as much dignity as I could muster, my broken glasses clutched in my bleeding hand. The whispers followed me like a toxic cloud. "Poor thing, she looks so fragile," murmured someone I recognized as Lisa's aunt. "The bride is right. That woman can't take care of herself anymore," added a cousin of Mark's. "She should be in a nursing home, not living alone," another guest commented with false compassion. Each word was acid on an open wound. I pushed through the ballroom doors into the cool evening air. My hands were still shaking as I fumbled for my cell phone in my worn black purse, a purse I'd used for 5 years, not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because I'd learned to value practicality over appearances, something my daughter-in-law would clearly never understand. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't used in over a year because I had naively hoped it would never be necessary. "Bill, it's Susan Davis," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I need you to come to the Royal Oaks Ballroom immediately. Yes, right now. Bring the documents, all of them. It's time they knew the truth." It had all started exactly 2.5 years ago. I remember it so clearly because it was the first warm Saturday in May. I'd been tending to the herbs on my balcony when Mark called, asking if he could stop by. There was something different in his voice, nervous, excited, like when he was a boy and had a secret he was bursting to share. "Mom, I want you to meet someone very special," he'd said when he arrived at my door, practically bouncing on his heels. And there she was, Lisa Peterson, 28 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair that must have cost a fortune to maintain, designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. From the very first moment, I knew something wasn't right. She stepped into my modest 2-bedroom apartment, and I watched her eyes sweep the room with the practiced efficiency of a real estate appraiser. The secondhand sofa I'd bought at a church sale, the faded curtains I'd made myself 20 years ago, the small kitchen with its outdated appliances. But I also noticed how her gaze lingered on the crown molding, the high ceilings, the large windows with their glimpse of Central Park in the distance. This building might look unassuming from the outside, but I knew what she was seeing. Prime Manhattan real estate, a location that would cost millions today. "How cozy," she murmured, running her fingers along my grandmother's bookshelf. Her tone suggested the opposite. Mark, completely blinded by what he believed was love, didn't notice the condescension dripping from her voice. "Mom made us dinner," he said proudly, guiding Lisa toward the kitchen table where I'd spent all afternoon preparing pot roast, his favorite since childhood. The meal was torture. Lisa barely touched the food I'd lovingly prepared, claiming she was watching her figure. When I asked about her family, she gave evasive answers, always steering the conversation back to my life, my finances, my living situation. "And how do you manage on a widow's pension, Susan?" she asked with fake concern, taking the tiniest bite of roasted carrots. "It must be hard getting by on so little, especially in this expensive city." I smiled and changed the subject, but I was paying attention. Very close attention. Over the next few months, I watched Lisa the way she watched me. Every visit revealed more of her true nature. She made comments about how outdated everything in my apartment was, about how I deserved something better in my golden years. But her eyes always returned to what really mattered: the prime location, the square footage, the potential value. One afternoon, while Mark was in the bathroom, I overheard her speaking softly on the phone in my kitchen. "Yes, Mom. His mother's apartment is in a super expensive area. If I can get her to move somewhere smaller, we could stay here until we have our own place. She's so naive, she'll probably even thank us for helping her with the transition." Her words cut through me like a knife, but I kept my composure when she returned to the living room, all smiles and innocence. From that moment on, every interaction with Lisa became a carefully orchestrated performance. She played the concerned daughter-in-law worried about her mother-in-law's well-being. I pretended to be the vulnerable old woman who needed guidance. But inside, I was gathering information, observing, understanding her true motivations. It was like a game of chess where we both thought we were winning. The pressure built gradually over the next year, so slowly that someone less observant might not have noticed. But I'd learned long ago to pay attention to patterns. It started with subtle suggestions during family dinners. "Susan, I've seen some lovely apartments for people your age," Lisa would say, sliding glossy brochures across the table. "All-inclusive services, no maintenance worries. You could finally relax." Then came the concern about my safety. "You can't keep living alone at your age," she'd insist, her voice dripping with false worry. "It's dangerous. What if you fell and no one found you for days?" Each argument was designed to make me feel incompetent, helpless, like a burden. What hurt most was watching Mark transform into her echo. My son, the boy I'd raised with so much love and sacrifice, began repeating her phrases like a trained parrot. "Mom, Lisa's right. Maybe you should consider moving somewhere more manageable." The psychological campaign intensified after they announced their engagement 8 months ago. Suddenly, visits became more frequent, but also more tense. Lisa started bringing actual real estate magazines, circling listings for senior communities with a red pen. "I'm just exploring options for you, Susan," she'd say, spreading the materials across my coffee table like a business presentation. "I want to make sure you have the best quality of life possible." But I wasn't idle either. One afternoon, when they went out to run wedding errands, I made a call to an old friend who worked in real estate. "Jen, I need you to investigate something for me," I said quietly, watching from my window to make sure they didn't return early. There's a couple very interested in my apartment. I want to know more about their real financial situation. What Jen discovered chilled me to the bone. Mark and Lisa were drowning in debt. The wedding they were planning cost over $50,000, completely financed with credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they rented was 3 months behind on payments. The luxury cars they drove were financed with payments they couldn't afford. Their entire lifestyle was a facade built on suffocating debt. Everything started to make sense. The rush to get married, the insistence that I move, the constant comments about my economic vulnerability. It wasn't love that united this couple. It was desperate need to find a solution to their financial problems. And my apartment, located in one of the most exclusive areas of the city, was their lifeline. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. My son, the boy I'd raised with values of honesty and hard work, had chosen the easy path of manipulation and deceit. He'd allowed an ambitious woman to convince him to see his own mother as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be loved and respected. 3 weeks before the wedding, their attempts became aggressive. "Susan, you can't keep being so selfish," Lisa had said, her mask finally slipping. We were alone in my apartment, and she didn't bother with the fake smile anymore. "Mark and I have sacrificed so much for this marriage. The least you can do is help us with housing." Her words no longer wore any pretense of concern. It was a direct demand disguised as a family favor. That night, I made a phone call that would change everything. "Bill, I need you to prepare some documents," I told my financial advisor through tears I could no longer hold back. "It's possible I'll very soon have to reveal information I've kept secret for years." What Bill Patterson knew about me could fit into a single folder, but that folder contained the truth of who Susan Davis really was. The next morning, I sat in Bill's downtown office, looking at documents most people would never believe belonged to the elderly woman who worked part-time at a flower shop and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. "Mrs. Davis," Bill said, his voice gentle but professional, "your current investment portfolio stands at $5.4 million. He turned the page. "The downtown office building generates $50,000 per month in rental income. The Miami Beach house is currently valued at $2.8 million. Your municipal bonds mature next year at—" "I know the numbers, Bill," I interrupted softly. "I need to know if there's any way they could have found out." Bill shook his head. "Everything is in trusts and LLCs, just as you and Robert set up 30 years ago. Unless someone knew exactly what to look for and had access to sealed financial records, there's no way they'd know." I looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there, my son was planning his wedding, believing his mother was a burden he needed to manage. Robert and I had built this life together. He'd started with a small import business, working 18-hour days, making smart investments, gradually building what became a silent empire. We'd made a conscious decision to live modestly, to protect our privacy, to shield our family from the problems that visible wealth attracts. "Wealth attracts problems," Robert used to say, usually while wearing his favorite flannel shirt that I'd bought at a discount store. "Invisible wealth gives you power." I never imagined I'd have to use that power against my own son. The flower shop where I worked 3 days a week wasn't because I needed the money. It was because I liked staying active, connected to my community. The old car I drove wasn't due to economic limitations, but because unnecessary ostentation only brings problems. My apartment, the one Lisa coveted so desperately, was actually the least valuable property in my portfolio. I'd bought it not for its economic value, but for the memories it held. It was where Robert and I had spent our last years together, where we'd grown old holding hands on the balcony, where he'd passed away in my arms after a brave battle with cancer. It wasn't for sale. It would never be for sale. Especially not to manipulators who saw it as nothing more than a solution to their financial irresponsibility. 2 weeks before the wedding, Bill called me with information that shattered what remained of my illusions. "Mrs. Davis, I've completed the audit you requested," he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "I think you should sit down." I was already sitting, but I gripped the phone tighter. "For the past 3 years," Bill continued, "you've transferred a total of $162,000 to cover your son's expenses, The number hit me like a physical blow. $48,000 for rent payments he thought were covered by work bonuses. $44,000 in credit card payments he believed were tax refunds. $18,000 for vehicle insurance he thought was a company benefit. $22,000 in miscellaneous expenses, and $30,000 as a deposit for the wedding venue. My hand flew to my mouth. $162,000. Money I'd been secretly transferring, thinking I was helping my son through a difficult time. Money that had actually been financing his transformation into someone I didn't recognize. "There's more," Bill said quietly. "For the past 6 months, Mark has been calling banks asking about loans against elderly mother's property. He's been researching legal procedures to obtain financial power of attorney over senior citizens." The room spun. My own son had been planning my systematic dispossession for months. "And the investigator's report on Lisa?" Bill hesitated. "Tell me." "According to surveillance at her favorite lunch spot, she told her friends, and I quote, 'I'm marrying an older, less attractive guy because his mother has valuable properties and no competing heirs. It's a strategic investment.'" I hung up the phone and sat in silence for what felt like hours. I had thought I was protecting my son. Instead, I'd been enabling his corruption. I'd been funding the very conspiracy designed to strip me of my dignity, my home, my autonomy. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my balcony, looking out at the city lights, thinking about Robert, about the values we'd tried to instill in Mark, about how love can sometimes become toxic when it refuses to let people face the consequences of their actions. By dawn, I had made my decision. At the wedding tonight, when Lisa had demanded my keys and I'd refused, I knew what would happen. I'd seen it in her eyes, the rage of someone whose carefully laid plans were being thwarted. I'd known the slap was coming. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere deep down, I'd known. And I'd also known that it would give me the justification I needed to do what should have been done long ago. Now, sitting in my car in the parking lot, waiting for Bill to arrive with the documents that would change everything, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The peace that comes from finally choosing yourself, from finally saying no to people who treat you as disposable, from finally understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable destruction. Headlights swept across the parking lot. Bill's black sedan pulled up beside my car. Through my broken glasses, I could see him getting out with a leather briefcase under his arm. It was time. Time for Mark and Lisa to meet the real Susan Davis. Time for them to learn that some women don't break when you slap them. They evolve. I sat in my old Honda, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Through the car window, I could still see the golden lights of the ballroom, hear the music that had started playing again, watch the silhouettes of guests who had already returned to celebrating as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just been assaulted in front of 130 people. My cheek still burned. I could feel it swelling, the heat radiating from where Lisa's hand had connected with my face. In the rearview mirror, even in the dim parking lot light, I could see the red handprint forming like a brand. This was my son's wedding day, the day I should have been dancing, crying happy tears, welcoming a daughter into our family. Instead, I was sitting alone in a parking lot, bleeding from cuts on my palm from broken glass, my face bruised, making a decision that would change everything forever. "This is Mark," I whispered to my reflection. "My baby boy. I carried him for 9 months. I raised him alone after Robert died. I sacrificed everything to give him a good life." But that same boy had stood motionless while his wife struck his mother, had said nothing, had done nothing, had looked at the floor as if I were invisible. The internal battle raged for exactly 30 seconds. Then I thought about that investigator's report, about Lisa telling her friends this was a strategic investment, about Mark researching how to declare me mentally incompetent, about 3 years of secret financial support, of me protecting him from consequences while he plotted to take everything from me. I picked up my phone. "Bill, bring everything. I'm ready." Then I made 2 more calls. "Bob? It's Susan. I need you to bring the brown folder from my desk drawer. The one in the back. Yes, right now. I'll explain when you get here." Bob Thompson had been my neighbor for 15 years. He'd watched Mark grow up, had been at Robert's funeral, had witnessed every one of Lisa's visits with her real estate appraisers and her fake concerned smiles. The third call went to Sarah. "Sarah, honey, I need you at the Royal Oaks Ballroom. Now. Yes, I know it's Mark's wedding. That's exactly why I need you here. Please trust me." As I waited, memories flooded back. Mark at 5 years old, bringing me flowers he'd picked from the neighbor's garden. Mark at 10, defending me when someone at school said his mom looked too old. Mark at 16, working his first job so he could buy me a Mother's Day gift with his own money. Where had that boy gone? When had my son become a stranger? Bob arrived first, slightly out of breath from rushing. He was 70 years old, but moved like a man on a mission when someone he cared about needed help. "Susan," he said, peering through my car window and seeing my swollen cheek. "My God, she actually hit you. You saw?" I was heading to the restroom when I heard the commotion. I saw everything. His jaw clenched. And I saw Mark do nothing. He handed me the folder, then squeezed my shoulder. "I've been watching them for months, Susan. The way they looked at your apartment, the things Lisa said when she thought no one was listening. You're doing the right thing." Sarah's car screeched into the parking lot moments later. She jumped out, her cocktail dress flying, her face a mask of concern and confusion. "Aunt Susan, what happened to your face?" Sarah was Robert's niece, his sister's daughter, but she'd been like a daughter to me since she was a little girl. After Robert passed, we'd grown even closer. She was the family I could trust. She rushed to my car and gasped when she saw my cheek. "Did someone—" Her eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God, did Lisa do this?" I nodded. "That witch!" Sarah exploded. I knew something was wrong. Mark's been so different lately. Stressed, always talking about money, avoiding family calls. And Lisa, she shook her head. I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. He's like a different person. "Sarah," I said carefully, "I need you to understand something. Mark isn't entirely to blame. Lisa has been manipulating him, yes, but he made his own choices. He chose to stand by while she attacked me." "What are you going to do?" Before I could answer, Bill Patterson's black sedan pulled up. He emerged with his briefcase, his expression grave but determined. "Mrs. Davis," he said formally, though his eyes were kind, "I have everything you requested, but I need to ask one final time. Are you absolutely certain about this? Once we walk through those doors, there's no going back." I looked at the 3 people standing with me. Bob, who had been like a brother since Robert passed. Sarah, who represented the family I wished I had. Bill, who had protected my interests for over a decade. Then I looked back at the ballroom, where my son was celebrating with a woman who had struck me, who had plotted to steal my home, who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," I said, stepping out of the car. "It's time they met the real Susan Davis." We walked toward the entrance together, a small army of truth about to storm the castle of lies. The music grew louder as we approached. I could hear laughter, the clink of champagne glasses, the sounds of people having a wonderful time. That was about to change. Bill opened the door and we stepped inside. The music stopped the moment we entered. It was like someone had pressed pause on reality itself. 130 pairs of eyes turned toward us. I watched recognition flicker across face after face. Some guests looked confused. Others looked uncomfortable, remembering that they'd stood by and done nothing when I was attacked. A few, very few, looked relieved to see me return. Lisa was in the center of the dance floor, posing for photos with Mark. Her pristine white dress glowed under the chandeliers. Her makeup was perfect. Her smile was radiant. Until she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she shouted across the ballroom, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You already left once. Wasn't that enough drama for one night?" I heard the nervousness underlying her anger. She sensed that something had shifted. Bill stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of legal experience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting this celebration. My name is William Patterson, and I'm the financial and legal advisor for Mrs. Susan Davis. I have urgent legal documents to deliver to Mr. Mark Davis and Mrs. Lisa Davis." The silence deepened. I saw several guests pulling out their phones, instinctively knowing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Mark slowly walked toward us, his face pale, his hand loosening his tie, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. "What's going on, Mom?" His voice cracked slightly. "Who is this man, and why is he talking about legal matters?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the boy I'd raised somewhere beneath the stranger he'd become. "Mark," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "This is Bill Patterson. He's been my financial advisor for over 10 years. He has some information that I think you'll find very enlightening." Bill opened his briefcase with a crisp snap that echoed through the ballroom. He pulled out the first document. "Mr. Mark Davis, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother provided for your apartment lease has been immediately canceled. Your landlord will be notified tomorrow morning. You have 30 days to find a new guarantor or vacate the property." All color drained from Mark's face. "Financial guarantee?" he whispered, looking at me with eyes that were beginning to fill with comprehension and horror. "Mom, what is he talking about?" But I could see in his expression that part of him already knew. For years, he must have suspected that his financial luck wasn't entirely natural. He'd just chosen not to ask questions because the answers might have been uncomfortable. Bill continued, relentless as a surgeon with a scalpel. "Additionally, the monthly transfers of $4,500 that your mother has been making to your personal accounts have been permanently suspended. This includes payments for credit cards, vehicle insurance, and various other expenses that you believed were being covered by other sources." Lisa let out a gasp that sounded almost animalistic. She ran toward us, her wedding dress trailing across the floor, her carefully applied makeup beginning to run with tears of rage and panic. "That's impossible!" she shrieked, her voice bouncing off the marble walls. "Mark doesn't have a rich mother. Look at her. Look at her clothes, her car. She's an old woman living on a miserable pension." Her hysteria was palpable. Several guests began backing toward the exits, sensing that the celebration had turned into something else entirely. "Finally," Bill said, pulling the last document from his folder like a magician revealing his final trick. "The guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been canceled. The ballroom management will require full payment before guests can leave tonight." His words fell on the ballroom like a bomb. The realization hit Mark like a physical blow. I watched understanding dawn across his face in stages: confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally, devastating comprehension. "You," he breathed, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. All this time, you've been paying for everything." His voice broke on the last word, and for just a moment, I saw the little boy he'd once been. Vulnerable, confused, lost. "For 3 years, Mark," I confirmed, my voice eerily calm despite the emotional storm raging inside me. 3 years I thought I was helping you through a difficult time. 3 years I believed you would eventually recover and become the man I raised you to be. 3 years I hoped you would remember the values I taught you." Lisa began pacing in circles, clutching her head, her perfect wedding moment disintegrating around her like ash. "This can't be happening. This can't be real." She whirled on me, her face contorted with rage. "You're a poor old woman. You work at a flower shop. You drive a piece of junk car. You can't have money." I met her eyes with a calm I hadn't known I possessed. "Appearances are deceiving, Lisa," I said softly. "For years, I chose to live simply because my husband Robert and I believe that visible wealth attracts problems." I paused, letting the words sink in. It turns out we were right. We just didn't expect the problems to come from our own family. The whispers exploded through the crowd like wildfire. Phones were raised, recording every moment. I could see the calculation in people's eyes as they mentally reassessed everything they thought they knew about the poor widow Susan Davis. "Mrs. Davis," Bill said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Would you like me to proceed with reading the full financial details? The question hung in the air like a sword over Mark and Lisa's heads. Please, Bill, I replied with a serenity that surprised even me. I think everyone deserves to know the full truth. Lisa tried to interrupt with a desperate shriek, but Bill raised his hand and continued with the precision of a surgeon. Over the last 36 months, Mrs. Susan Davis has transferred a total of $162,000 to cover the living expenses of her son Mark Davis and his fiancée, now wife. He consulted his documents. This includes $48,000 for rent payments, $44,000 for credit card payments, $18,000 for vehicle insurance, and $22,000 for miscellaneous expenses. A collective murmur swept through the ballroom like a wave. Several guests pulled out calculators on their phones, as if they couldn't believe the numbers they were hearing. Furthermore, Bill continued without mercy, Mrs. Davis personally guaranteed the total cost of this celebration, including the ballroom, catering, music, flowers, and photography, for an amount of $53,000, money which, as I mentioned, is no longer available. David Martinez, the ballroom manager, pushed through the crowd with several papers in his hands and a very serious expression on his face. Mrs. Davis, he said, his voice professional but tense. I just received notification of payment cancellation. The outstanding balance for tonight's event is $53,000. I need to know who will be responsible for this payment immediately. Mark stumbled forward, reaching out to me with trembling hands. Mom, please, there has to be some way to fix this. The wedding, the guests, everything. His voice broke. Please, you can't do this. But I could see in his eyes that he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd lost. Not just money or financial support. He'd lost his mother. The way to fix this, Mark, I said quietly, was not to break it in the first place. Lisa collapsed into a nearby chair, her wedding dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. Everything is ruined, she sobbed, genuine tears now mixing with her mascara. Everything we planned. Everything we worked for. It's all destroyed. No, I said, approaching her for the first time since the slap. I looked down at her, forcing her to meet my eyes. What's destroyed are the lies, the greed, the lack of respect. What's destroyed is the illusion that you can treat people like objects and expect there to be no consequences. I turned to Mark, who looked like he might be sick. There is a way forward, son. You can learn from this. You can grow from this. You can become the person I hoped you would be before greed corrupted you. My voice softened slightly, because despite everything, he was still my child. But that growth will have to happen without my financial help. Without my apartment, without my inheritance. You'll have to do it the hard way, like everyone else does. Sarah stepped forward and took my arm, tears streaming down her face. Aunt Susan, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Mark had become this. Bob stood on my other side, a silent pillar of support. Bill closed his briefcase with a final, definitive snap. Mrs. Davis, all documents have been delivered and explained. The legal effects begin immediately. He turned to Mark and Lisa with a professional expression. I strongly suggest you contact your own legal and financial advisors as soon as possible. As we turned to leave, I heard Mark's voice, broken and desperate, call out behind me. Mom, wait, please. I stopped but didn't turn around. I love you, he said, his voice thick with tears. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I love you too, Mark, I replied, still facing the exit. I always will. But love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Love doesn't mean sacrificing my dignity for your convenience. I looked back at him one final time. When you're ready to have a real conversation about respect, values, and responsibility, when you've learned what it means to stand on your own 2 feet, then we can talk. But first, you need to find a way to solve the mess you created here, all on your own. With those words, I walked out of the ballroom with Bill, Bob, and Sarah flanking me like an honor guard. Behind us, I left chaos. Desperate phone calls, angry creditors, shocked guests, and 2 people who had just learned that some bridges, once burned, take a very long time to rebuild. If they can be rebuilt at all. 3 days after the wedding, my apartment had become a sanctuary. Bob came over every morning with coffee and croissants from the bakery downstairs, making sure I was eating, making sure I was okay. Sarah had essentially moved into my guest room, refusing to leave me alone in case those vultures try something. My phone had been ringing nonstop. Mark had called 37 times. I'd listened to exactly 3 voicemails before I stopped. They all followed the same pattern: anger, then denial, then desperate pleading. Lisa had sent 14 text messages, each more hysterical than the last. Her parents had shown up at my door twice, demanding I fix the mess I'd caused. I'd closed the door in their faces both times, but there was something else happening, something I hadn't anticipated. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Sarah burst into my living room with her laptop, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and excitement. "Aunt Susan, you need to see this." She turned the screen toward me, and I saw myself. Or rather, I saw a shaky cell phone video of the ballroom confrontation. The view count made my breath catch. 2 million views in 3 days. "There are dozens of videos," Sarah said, scrolling rapidly. "Different angles, different moments. But this one..." She clicked on another video. "This one has gone completely viral." It was the moment I'd told Lisa that appearances are deceiving. The camera had caught the shock on her face, the gasps from the crowd, the way Mark had literally stumbled backward when Bill announced the $162,000 in transfers. I scrolled through the comments, my hands trembling. "This woman is a queen. She played the long game and won." I'm crying. My own daughter tried to do this to me. Thank you for being brave enough to stand up. The way she stayed calm while exposing them, iconic. Notice how the son just stood there when his wife slapped his mother? He deserved everything he got. There were thousands of them, tens of thousands. "Susan," Bob said quietly from the doorway, "you've become a symbol. People are calling you the silent millionaire. You're all over social media." Before I could process this, Sarah's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then her eyes went wide. "Aunt Susan, that was Jen. She says Mark filed a legal petition yesterday." Sarah's voice dropped. "He's requesting a court evaluation of your mental competency based on irrational behavior and erratic financial decisions at a family event." The words hit me like ice water. "He's doing what?" Bob exploded. "After everything, he's actually trying to declare you incompetent?" Sarah handed me her phone. On the screen was a legal document. As I read it, my blood ran cold. Mark had provided sworn statements from several wedding guests describing my unjustified emotional outburst. He was painting me as a confused, vindictive old woman who had lost touch with reality. But there was more. "Jen did some digging," Sarah said softly. "Lisa has been visiting our neighbors, telling them to watch for concerning behavior. She's building a case that you're mentally unstable." I set down the phone, my hands surprisingly steady. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my freedom, my autonomy, my very right to control my own life. They had declared war, and they were about to learn that I knew how to fight back. The next morning, my apartment became a war room. Bill Patterson arrived with 2 additional lawyers, Patricia Wong, who specialized in elder abuse cases, and Thomas Miller, whose expertise was in defamation law. We sat around my dining room table with files, documents, and laptops spread across every surface. "Mrs. Davis," Patricia said, her voice firm but kind, "we can fight this, and we can win. But I need to know, are you absolutely sure you want to take this step? Once we file our counterpetition, this becomes a very public legal battle." I thought about Mark as a little boy, holding my hand on his first day of school. I thought about the man he'd become, who was now trying to strip me of my autonomy rather than face the consequences of his actions. "I'm sure," I said. "What do we need to do?" Over the next hour, they laid out the strategy. We would file a counterpetition requesting the court to dismiss Mark's claim and issue a restraining order preventing him and Lisa from contacting me or coming near my property. We would also file for compensation for emotional damages. We have extremely strong evidence, Thomas said, pulling up photos on his laptop. Medical documentation of the assault, your bruised cheek. Multiple videos from the wedding showing the attack and the context. Bank records proving a pattern of financial dependence. Witness testimony from Bob about Lisa bringing real estate appraisers to your home without permission. And the viral videos work in our favor, Patricia added. It's hard to argue someone is mentally incompetent when millions of people are applauding the logic and justice of their actions. Bill leaned forward. Mrs. Davis, I have one concern. Mark is still your son. Are you prepared for how difficult this will be? Court battles are emotionally exhausting, especially when family is involved. I looked at each of them in turn, these people who had rallied to protect me. I've been thinking about this for 3 days, I said quietly. I haven't slept much. I've questioned myself 1,000 times, wondering if I'm being too harsh. I paused, feeling the weight of the decision. But then I remember, he stood there and watched his wife hit me. He said nothing. He spent months plotting to take my home. And now, instead of apologizing, he's trying to declare me mentally incompetent. My voice grew stronger. If I don't fight this, I'm teaching him that abuse is acceptable, that there are no real consequences. This isn't revenge. This is accountability. Patricia smiled grimly. Then let's hold them accountable. 4 months after the wedding, something unexpected happened. A producer from Life Stories, one of the most watched news magazine shows in the country, called Bill's office. They wanted to interview me. Your story has touched a nerve nationally, the producer explained during our first phone call. We've received hundreds of letters from viewers who have experienced similar situations. Elder financial abuse is an epidemic that no one talks about. Your courage could help change that. I agreed to the interview. Not for revenge, but because I'd learned something important from those 2 million video views. I wasn't alone, and neither were the thousands of other seniors suffering in silence. The night before the taping, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what I wanted to say, how I wanted to represent not just myself, but all the silent victims who'd never had the chance to speak up. The studio was smaller than I'd expected, but filled with more lights than I'd ever seen. The host, Michelle Carter, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a reputation for letting her subjects tell their stories without interruption. Mrs. Davis, she said as we sat across from each other, thank you for trusting us with your story. When the cameras started rolling, something strange happened. All my nervousness vanished. I wasn't Susan Davis, the humiliated mother. I was Susan Davis, the woman who'd found her voice. Michelle asked about the build-up, the manipulation, the slap. I answered honestly, holding nothing back. But it was her final question that mattered most. Mrs. Davis, if Mark is watching this right now, what would you say to him? I looked directly into the camera lens, knowing that somewhere, my son might be watching. Mark, if you're listening, I want you to know that I still love you. I will always love you because you're my son. My voice caught, but I continued. But loving someone doesn't mean accepting abuse. Loving someone does not mean sacrificing your dignity for their convenience. Loving someone doesn't mean becoming a victim of their greed. I took a breath. The door to my heart will always be open for you, but only if you can walk through it as the honorable man I tried to raise you to be. Not the man who stood silent while his wife struck his mother. Not the man who plotted to steal my home. Not the man who tried to declare me incompetent rather than face his own mistakes. You have to earn your way back, I said firmly, through genuine change, through real accountability, through proving that you've learned what family actually means. When the interview aired 2 weeks later, it was watched by over 8 million people. The hashtag #StandWithItSusan trended for 3 days, and the court date for Mark's petition was scheduled for the following month. The courtroom was packed. Judge Rachel Harrison, a stern woman in her early 60s, surveyed the crowded gallery with obvious displeasure. This is not entertainment, she announced. Anyone who cannot maintain appropriate courtroom decorum will be removed. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Patricia, Bill, and Thomas. Across the aisle, Mark and Lisa sat with their attorney, a young man named Michael Bryant, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the hearing progressed. Mark looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his suit hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes. For just a moment, I felt a pang of maternal concern. Then I remembered why we were here. Patricia stood to present our case. She was methodical, devastating, thorough. She showed the video of the slap. Several jurors visibly flinched. She presented the bank records showing $162,000 in transfers. She called Bob Thompson, who testified about Lisa bringing real estate appraisers to my building without my knowledge. This is textbook elder financial abuse, Patricia concluded. Systematic manipulation designed to isolate and exploit a vulnerable senior citizen for financial gain. Michael Bryant did his best for Mark and Lisa, but he was outgunned. He tried to paint the situation as a family misunderstanding that had escalated due to wedding stress. Then Patricia called Lisa to the stand. "Mrs. Davis," Patricia began, "did you or did you not tell your friends, and I quote, 'I'm marrying an older, less attractive guy because his mother has valuable properties and no competing heirs. It's a strategic investment?'" Lisa's face went pale. That was taken out of context." "Really? What context makes that statement acceptable?" Lisa had no answer. When Mark took the stand, I saw the boy I'd raised struggling with the man he'd become. "Mr. Davis, do you love your mother?" Patricia asked. "Yes," Mark said, his voice barely audible. "Then why did you allow your wife to assault her without saying a word?" Mark's composure cracked. Tears streamed down his face. I don't know. I was confused. Lisa kept saying Mom was too old to take care of herself, that we were helping her. He looked directly at me for the first time. "I was so wrong. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." His tears were genuine. His remorse seemed real, but it was too late for apologies to change the facts of the case. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke clearly and calmly. "I didn't do this because I hate my son," I said. "I did this because I love him enough to let him face the consequences of his actions. If I had continued enabling his financial irresponsibility, continued accepting disrespect, continued being a victim, I wouldn't have been helping him. I would have been destroying him." Judge Harrison listened to everything, reviewed every document, watched every video. Her ruling was swift and decisive. "Mr. Davis's petition for mental competency evaluation is denied," she announced. "The evidence shows not mental incompetence, but rather a woman of sound mind protecting herself from systematic abuse." She turned to Mark and Lisa with steel in her eyes. "Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order. Mr. and Mrs. Davis are prohibited from contacting or approaching Mrs. Susan Davis for a period of no less than 1 year. They will pay $45,000 in legal fees to the defendant, and they will complete a mandatory family abuse education program." She leaned forward. "Mr. Davis, your mother has given you a gift, the gift of consequences, the gift of the opportunity to become a better man. Don't waste it." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through my chest. It was over. 6 months after the court ruling, I sat on my balcony with my morning coffee, watching the sun rise over the city. My life had changed in ways I never could have imagined. The Davis Foundation for Elder Protection, funded with $1 million from my investments, had helped 87 families in 6 months. Sarah ran the education programs. Bill provided legal advice pro bono. Jen helped seniors relocate safely when necessary. We'd turned my pain into purpose. Bob knocked on my door, right on schedule. "Foundation meeting at 2, he reminded me, handing me a croissant. "And you have 3 new cases to review." As he left, I noticed an envelope on my doormat. No return address, just my name and handwriting I'd recognized since Mark learned to write. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Dear Mom, I don't expect you to answer this letter. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it yet. But I need you to know, I understand now. You didn't destroy my life. I did that myself." Lisa left me when the money ran out. That was the wake-up call I needed. She never loved me. She loved what she thought she could get from you. I'm working 2 jobs now, living in a studio apartment, taking the bus. For the first time in my adult life, I'm paying my own way. And Mom, it feels good. It feels honest. I'm in therapy. I'm attending the court-ordered program. I'm learning about manipulation, about boundaries, about respect. I'm learning to be the man you tried to raise me to be. I saw your interview. I cried through the whole thing. You were right about everything. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for money or help. I'm just asking you to know that I'm changing, really changing. And someday, when I've proven that change is real and lasting, I hope I can look you in the eye again. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it, but I'm sorry anyway. Your son, Mark. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I allowed myself to hope. Not hope that everything would magically be fixed. Not hope that we'd return to how things were. But hope that maybe, just maybe, my son was finally learning the lessons I'd tried to teach him his whole life. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. I wouldn't respond. Not yet. He needed to walk this path on his own, without my guidance, without my financial safety net. He needed to prove, to himself more than to me, that he could change. But I kept the letter. That afternoon, an elderly woman named Helen Rodriguez sat across from me at the foundation office, tears in her eyes. "My son wants me to sign over my house," she said. "He says it's for my own good, but I feel like he's taking advantage of me." I took her hand gently. "Tell me everything. We'll figure this out together." As I listened to her story, so similar to my own, I realized something profound. I'd lost a son, at least temporarily, but I'd found myself. I'd found my voice. I'd found my purpose. And I'd discovered that sometimes the strongest act of love is refusing to enable destruction. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them face the full weight of their consequences. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The bruise had long since faded. The cuts had healed. But the woman looking back at me was different from the one who'd been slapped 6 months ago. She was stronger, freer, more herself than she'd been in years. People still asked if I regretted what I'd done, if I wished I'd handled things differently, if I missed my son. Of course I missed him. He was my child. But I didn't regret standing up for myself. I didn't regret demanding respect. I didn't regret teaching him that actions have consequences. Because love without boundaries isn't love. It's captivity. And at 68 years old, I'd finally learned to set myself free. Tomorrow, I'd help Helen Rodriguez protect her home from her manipulative children. Next week, I'd testify at the state legislature about stronger protections for seniors. Next month, I'd speak at a national conference on elder abuse. My story had ended one chapter, but a much more important one had just begun. And if Mark truly changed, if he became the man I'd always believed he could be, well, maybe someday there would be room for another chapter in our story. But that chapter would be written with respect, honesty, and genuine change. Or it wouldn't be written at all. I turned off the light and climbed into bed, more at peace than I'd been in years. The slap that was meant to break me had instead set me free, and that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all.